A young woman moved into a new apartment with her husband and their 4-year-old daughter. She was thrilled to finally leave the dormitory, and the previous owners had left the apartment in excellent condition. No repairs were needed. Even the furniture looked as if it had just been bought. She wanted to share her excitement with her friends and decided to take photos of the apartment to post on social media. While she was photographing the leftover furniture from the previous owners, her daughter initially followed her but quickly lost interest and went to watch TV. Leaving the little girl alone with her cartoons, the woman closed the door and took a picture of an antique dresser standing to the left of the room's entrance. She posted the photos online as planned. While checking her friends' reactions, she noticed a strange comment from one of her friends under one of the pictures. "Whose feet are those under the door?" The woman replied in a private message, "Those are my daughter's feet. She was sitting in the room at the time. I didn't even think she'd appear in the photo, but it turned out kind of funny." The response she received immediately afterward made her shiver. She read it several times, trying to understand. "Does your daughter have 6 toes on each foot?" Confused, the woman zoomed in on the photo and realized her friend was right. Under the door were small child's feet with a total of 12 perfectly formed toes. At that moment, the apartment seemed colder. She stared at her monitor, afraid to even look at the door. Her mind went to the room where her daughter was playing. The irrational fear didn't go away, but it was now mixed with a strong desire to protect her child. Finally, her maternal instinct took over, and she slowly approached the door. As she got closer, her fear intensified. When she reached the door, she realized that if she opened her eyes, she would see something horrifying. She covered her ears with her hands, afraid of what she might hear. 15 minutes later, her husband returned and found her lying on the floor near the door, curled up. She was covering her eyes and ears and quietly crying, muttering to herself. Confused, he tried to ask what had happened, but she barely responded. He called an ambulance. Doctors diagnosed her with a severe psychiatric disorder. She spent the rest of her life in a mental health facility. Only her husband visited her regularly, as she could not interact with her daughter. The photo was eventually forgotten. It was just considered the delusion of a mentally ill person. The little girl grew up healthy and mentally stable, with one exception. She never allowed anyone to take her picture again. In 2002, a mysterious book appeared on bookstore shelves, written by an unknown author. There was no advertising, no hype, just a gray cover with black letters that read, "The Book of Another's Blood." Yet somehow, whispers about it spread. People who heard about it rushed to buy it, desperate not to miss out. Some opened the book right in the store, only to find every page blank. Shocked, they demanded their money back. Others took it home, flipped through it, and felt the same creeping unease. Within a year, only 3 copies were sold and never returned. Owners may have thought blank pages could be useful, or maybe they simply disappeared, moved away, or passed the book along to friends. Then, months later, the book returned, and this time, the first page was filled. Around 100 copies were sold, drawing curiosity seekers and collectors alike. The page contained sentences in German, though the book had been first printed in Russia. Each sentence was numbered, about 10 in total. Many readers pestered friends who spoke the language to decode them. What they found was horrifying. The sentences were descriptions of violent, gruesome deaths, strangulation, bleeding out, drowning, and worse. After that, the rest of the pages were blank again. 6 months later, police were confronted with a string of bizarre suicides. The deaths were strange, sometimes almost absurd, but always unsettling. A man choked on his own teeth after knocking them out. A woman attempted to drink her own blood. Receipts from the bookstore were found in every apartment, but never the book itself. Meanwhile, other owners discovered something impossible. Their books continued to fill themselves with new text. Police dismissed the supernatural and hunted for a killer. The only clue? Every victim had purchased the book from the same store. People tried to destroy it. They burned it, tore it, even tried to shred it, but it refused to be destroyed. Smoke curled from its pages, the cover blackened, but it remained intact. The more deaths occurred, the more desperate people became to get rid of it. A week later, authorities caught the store clerk trying to flee the country. He spent a month in jail until fellow inmates beat him to death. And still, the deaths continued, each one more disturbing than the last. In 2010, the book was finally captured. When one copy was seized, all others vanished. By then, nearly half of the pages had been filled. The author was never found. Every page had been removed, and since they could neither be burned nor torn, the pages were stored in a library, each placed in a separate volume. On their own, the pages seemed harmless, but the indestructible text was the danger. Access was tightly controlled to ensure the book could never be reassembled. The cover was locked in an iron case, watched nearly around the clock. Until 2013. On April 22, the cover disappeared, along with the first 10 pages. And they continue to vanish, one by one. The last known victim, number 989, was a man named Sergei, his last name classified. He drilled through his own throat. Authorities covered it up, and even secret services have no idea when the book of another's blood will return.
Irina Nikiforovna was my neighbor, an elderly woman whose life had long since turned bitter and lonely. Her son was a drug addict, serving time behind bars, and her daughter had vanished years ago. A sad fate, yet all too familiar in our society. Nikiforovna survived on a meager pension. Evenings found her perched on a bench, cursing the government, dissecting neighbors' lives, and muttering about her children, not with warmth, but with venom. When her children were mentioned, her words were curses, especially when it came to her daughter. At 23, Alina had stolen from her and fled. Nikiforovna, miserly and unforgiving, could never let that go. Her son stole from her in small increments, slipping under her notice, but that never drew the same fury. Then, unexpectedly, Alina returned. She stepped into the apartment calmly, greeted her mother with a quiet, "Hello, Mom," and ignored the torrent of insults hurled at her. Where she had been, why she had come back, no one knew, and no one really asked. Life under her mother's roof, however, was far from easy. Nikiforovna set out to drive her away. Their arguments echoed through the building. No one intervened. They screamed at each other on the stairwell, in the yard, even through the walls of the apartment. Nikiforovna jabbed her with needles, hurled objects. Alina endured. She had nowhere else to go. She worked, helped with household chores, cared for her mother as best she could. Nikiforovna accepted the care, but coexistence was impossible. One day, her mother barred her from the apartment entirely. Alina went out to buy medicine, and upon her return, Nikiforovna snatched it and slammed the door in her face. For 12 hours, Alina sat on the bench outside. By evening, tempers boiled over. She pounded and screamed at the door. In response, her mother threw boiling water. Someone called the police, another an ambulance. Alina shrank into a corner, wailing like a wounded animal, but when the paramedics arrived, she was gone. The next morning, she was found in the attic, hanged on a clothesline. Beneath her, written in chalk, were the words, "I will boil you in your own hot water." Nikiforovna did not leave her apartment that day. After that tragedy, strange things began to happen. The building's wiring faltered. Lights went out 2 or 3 times a week for no reason, while neighboring buildings remained untouched. 2 months after Alina's death, the hot water stopped altogether. Nikiforovna's behavior shifted. She rarely ventured outside, and she told the older women in the building that Alina visited her dreams every night, threatening her. Then, she disappeared. No one saw her. The lights in her apartment stayed dark. No one could reach her. I had been away at the sea, and upon my return, I learned of her death. She had literally boiled herself alive in her bathtub. She had filled it with water, heating it with an immersion heater. Then she placed the heater in a cup, but forgot to turn it off. When she climbed into the tub, she likely lost consciousness, fell, and knocked the cup over. 2 weeks passed before anyone found her, the stench unbearable. For 2 weeks, she had slowly cooked herself in her own home. The problems with electricity and water ceased the moment she died.
My friend told me this story over a beer the other night, and I swear, he didn't embellish a word. I'll tell it the way he did. It's weird, a little funny, and definitely unsettling. Aunt Valia, our neighbor who lived on the first floor, had recently passed away. She had been part of the building for decades. Everyone knew her, everyone loved her, and when the funeral day came, the whole block felt it. Everything was ready. They were about to carry her casket out when the first strange thing happened. The front door lock jammed, completely, dead. It had never been a problem before. Key from the inside? Nothing. Key from the outside? Nothing. Jiggle it, twist it, pry it? Nothing. One of the neighbors muttered, "Really? Now?" They tried to remove the lock, but the screws stripped, bolts spun uselessly, and somehow nothing worked. After about an hour of struggling, someone finally said, "Well, it's a first-floor apartment. Let's just window it." And that's exactly what they did. Once Aunt Valia was finally on her way to the cemetery, they went back to the car, ready to drive there themselves. Only, the car wouldn't start. Tried everything. Push starting it, checking the ignition, fiddling with the battery, nothing. And the muddy driveway ensured that everyone pushing the car ended up soaked in dirt from head to toe. A brand new car. Then someone, half joking, half desperate, said, "Grandma, let us go home." And, like a miracle, the engine roared to life. But the car still wouldn't move. It was as if some invisible hand was holding it back. "Grandma, let us go," the family shouted. Finally, it rolled forward, and after that, nothing unusual happened with the car. But the weirdness wasn't done. That night, there was banging at the door. Not a polite knock, hard, deliberate pounding. Everyone heard it. They checked. No one was there. A few nights later, the deceased's daughter-in-law woke up to see Aunt Valia's silhouette by the dim light of a burning lamp. She screamed, swore, woke the entire apartment. That went on for a few nights, then stopped. Then came the 40th day after Aunt Valia's death. My friend's mom was sitting in the kitchen with a headache, tea in hand, holding the warm cup to her temple, debating whether to go to the memorial. They'd been neighbors for decades, practically family. "Forgive me, Aunt Valia, but I don't think I can make it today." And then the cup cracked. With a loud pop, tea spilled all over her robe, but somehow didn't burn her. She froze, then, headache or not, got up and went. At the memorial, something else happened. A sparrow flew in through the window, circled the room like it owned the place, then flew back out. Everyone was silent. No one laughed. No one spoke. It was like Aunt Valia herself was checking to make sure everything was in order. And after that, the strange events stopped. The jammed lock, the stubborn car, the banging at the door, the miraculous sparrow, they left everyone with the same thought. Maybe some things don't end when people do. Maybe some things just stick around to make sure you remember them.
Okay, so there was this girl named Julia. She was in 3rd grade, just a normal kid. She liked drawing, hanging out with her friends, eating candy after school, kid stuff. Then one day, their teacher introduced a new student. Her name was Daisy. At first, Daisy didn't seem special at all. She was quiet, polite, and always on time. She blended right in. But Julia noticed something. One tiny little detail. Daisy always wore this bracelet. A shiny golden bracelet that looked expensive. Almost too expensive for a kid. And she never, ever took it off. At first, Julia thought, whatever, she just likes it. Some kids wear the same sneakers every day. No big deal. But then things got weird. One evening, Julia was at her best friend's house across the street. They were playing by the window when she spotted Daisy in her own home. And Julia noticed, really noticed, for the first time. Daisy wore the bracelet at dinner. She wore it while brushing her teeth. She even walked into the bathroom, steam rising from the shower, still wearing it. Who does that? Julia couldn't stop thinking about it. And a few days later, the other girls in class started noticing too. They got jealous. That bracelet shimmered in the light, and it almost looked like it glowed when Daisy moved. The girls begged her, "Come on, Daisy, just let me wear it for a day. Please, just 1 hour." But Daisy always shook her head. Her face would go pale, her eyes would dart away, and she'd whisper, "I can't." That only made everyone want it more. Especially Julia. She dreamed about the bracelet at night. She imagined how it would sparkle on her own wrist, and one day she couldn't resist. When Daisy wasn't paying attention, Julia lunged forward. She grabbed her arm, tore the bracelet off, and shoved it onto her own wrist. And then, Daisy's skin began to peel, first in small flakes, then in strips. It slid off her arms, her face, her neck. The room filled with this sickening smell, like rotten meat and burning metal. Her lips, dripping, trembling, leaned close to Julia's ear and whispered, "Now you're cursed too. Never take it off." And from that day on, Julia wore the bracelet. At school, at dinner, even in the shower. And no one ever saw Daisy again.
My grandmother once told me a story from her childhood, a story that completely changed the way she saw the world. Her mother, my great-grandmother, was an extraordinary woman, hardworking, warm, always ready to welcome guests with laughter and food. After her husband died, she lived alone in a small but cozy house. Her children had families of their own by then and visited only occasionally. Life went on quietly until one terrible night. When neighbors came by, they found her sitting at the table, eyes wild, clutching a small cross in her hands. The lamp on the table burned until morning, though no one knew why she refused to turn it off. The following evening, she begged her daughter, my grandmother, to stay with her, saying she was too afraid to sleep alone. That night, she revealed a terrifying secret. She had been lying in bed when she heard scratching sounds in her room. At first, she thought it was the cat, but the cat usually spent nights outside hunting and rarely came indoors. Alarmed, she lit the lamp and nearly fainted. From the corner of the room, a black, shaggy creature was staring at her. It looked like some twisted monkey baring its teeth in a horrible grin. The stench it gave off was unbearable. It didn't dare come too close, though. The light seemed to hold it back. Instead, it circled the room, glaring at her, stretching out its clawed hands. Terrified, she pulled a cross from beneath her nightgown and began to pray. The creature let out a low growl, retreated to the far corner, and vanished. The next night, the demon didn't return, Perhaps it was driven off by the fact she wasn't alone. Her daughter, though shaken, dismissed the whole thing as her mother's imagination. And with her own children to care for, she didn't come back for the next couple of nights. Neighbors later told her that on those nights they heard terrible screams coming from the little house. But when they knocked, her mother called back through the door, insisting she was fine and refusing to let anyone in. On the third night, the screams stopped. By morning, she was dead. People whispered that she had been strangled. Faint marks, like the print of fingers, were found on her neck. On the floor beside her lay the shattered lamp. It seemed that, in her final hour, she had not managed to light the one thing that had once kept the darkness and the monster at bay. A little girl once had a very strange dream. At first, she soared high into the sky, but then suddenly found herself in a dark cave. It was filthy and full of dust. She kept sneezing and couldn't stop. As she sneezed in her sleep, she thought, "What a strange dream. I'm dreaming, and I know I'm dreaming." Then a light appeared, and she was transported to another cave. But this one was bright and beautiful. Its walls glowed blue, and light streamed through them. Suddenly, it went dark again. The girl lay there in the darkness for what felt like forever. "I wish I could wake up already. This is getting so boring," she thought. Finally, the light returned, shining once again through the walls. She heard a crackling sound, turned her head, and froze in horror. A hole had opened in the wall, and from it emerged the snout of some monstrous creature. "A giant rat!" she screamed, but in an instant the snout vanished. The girl crawled through the hole herself and looked around. Everything was strange, incomprehensible. She stood on a huge shattered sheet of glass. Looking closer, she realized it wasn't glass at all. It was a giant iPhone with a broken screen. "What a weird dream," she thought again. "I wonder if I can fly?" She tried, and it worked. She soared high into the air and looked down. Below her stretched a massive landfill. "So that's where I am, on a dump," she realized. Then the rain began. She dissolved into the drops and slipped underground, traveling through tunnels until she reached a river. Shivering with cold, she crawled inside a fish to keep warm. But a fisherman caught the fish, brought it home, and fried it. While the fish sizzled in the pan, the girl escaped into the kitchen vent and got stuck. When she finally wriggled free, she spotted a candy on the table. It was expensive and delicious, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't bite it. Then a cat appeared, hissing at her. She bolted out through a window. Outside, the rain was still falling. Again, she dissolved into the water. But this time, she didn't go underground. She stayed in a puddle. People walked across her, cars splashed through. She clung to the boot of a passing man. By now, she was exhausted. She didn't want to fly anymore. More than anything, she longed to wake up. She felt like she had been dreaming for days. The man eventually came home, took off his boots, and the girl gasped. It was her apartment. It was her dad. She shouted with joy, but he didn't hear her. "I have to get back to my bed. I have to get back to my bed," she thought. She flew to her room, lay down, and tried to wake up, but nothing happened. Then she noticed something strange. On the table stood a vase filled with red carnations. Next to it was a framed photograph of herself, bordered in black, as if she had died. "Maybe I really am dead," she thought. She looked at her parents. Their eyes were red, their faces weary from crying. Just then, a sparrow landed on the bird feeder outside the window. The girl leapt into its body. Suddenly, she was the sparrow, fluttering and chirping. She flew into the room and chirped loudly. Her mother sighed. "Oh, look at that! A sparrow flew in. Oh, how I wish it were our daughter." Mom, it's me! I'm not dead!" the girl cried. At first, her parents didn't understand the bird's song.
But slowly they began to make out her words. Her mother fainted. The girl told her father everything about her strange journey. He questioned her, then her mother joined in. Finally, her father said, "The night you disappeared, the neighbors upstairs were vacuuming late. They had just bought an expensive, powerful vacuum cleaner. I even went to complain about the noise. That must have been it. The vacuum sucked your soul right out as you fell asleep. In the morning, we found your body lifeless in bed. We never imagined it could be connected to the vacuum. We buried you. The funeral was 2 days ago. By now, your body must have already begun to rot." They decided to dig up the grave. Sure enough, the body had started to decay. But the girl didn't care. She slipped back inside it happily. Disgusting, foul-smelling, but it was hers.
My neighbor Catherine was a widow raising 2 daughters on her own. She worked tirelessly, often to the point of exhaustion, but still managed to provide for her family. They even got to spend a couple of weeks at the beach in the summer, which back in the early 2000s felt like a real luxury. Overall, Catherine didn't complain about her lot in life, but one thing weighed on her constantly. She and her girls lived in a rental. Her parents had a 3-bedroom apartment, but it was already overcrowded. They lived there with Catherine's paralyzed grandmother, her brother, his wife, and their chronically ill child. Owning her own place seemed like nothing more than a dream. It became her obsession. Day after day, she would repeat how wonderful it would be to have a home of her own, free from her landlord's quirks and rules. She even imagined how she could finally save enough money to send her daughters to ballet school. Apparently, fate heard her pleas, but in the cruelest possible way. First, her grandmother passed away, and the very next day, her parents, her brother, his wife, and their child were all killed in a horrific car accident. Catherine inherited her parents' apartment, the home she had longed for so desperately. But at what cost? To this day, she blames herself, thinking she wasn't specific enough in her wish. She never added the words, "as long as everyone stays safe and healthy." And yet, her wish did come true. Story 2. I have a distant relative named Tamara. She was one of those women who could make men lose their heads, intelligent, strikingly beautiful, and full of charm. But she had a problem. She never felt real love. Everything seemed bland, unexciting. She longed for passion, something fiery, overwhelming, the kind of love you read about in novels. Well into her 30s, she finally met the man she had been dreaming of since her youth. She fell hopelessly, irreversibly in love. But fate played a cruel trick on her. The man was completely unmoved by her charms. He had a family, strong values, and clear boundaries. He made it very clear that her feelings were neither appropriate nor welcome. Tamara suffered terribly. To make matters worse, the man lived in her building, just next door. As the years went by, she withered before everyone's eyes. 6 years later, she was diagnosed with cancer. Not long after, she passed away. Tamara's wish came true. She finally experienced that otherworldly, all-consuming love she had yearned for. She just forgot to add one important condition: that the love be mutual.
Trapped in a dream. Not long ago, my parents went out of town to spend a few days at the dacha. Nothing unusual about it, though they rarely left the city. They planned to return Tuesday. On Sunday night, I stayed up at my computer until about 3 a.m. Exhausted, I finally shut it down, slid the bolt across the gate, and headed to bed with the cat curled beside me. I drifted off almost instantly. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by strange noises in the hallway. I figured it was our other cat messing around. I reached for the night lamp, but it wouldn't turn on. Need to change the bulb, I thought, trying the ceiling light. Nothing. Great, power's out. And then, the corridor light snapped on by itself. It was motion activated. When I opened my bedroom door, my jaw nearly hit the floor. The house was full of people. Familiar people.
All my parents' friends were there, laughing, talking, and even my parents themselves. My mom was in the kitchen, chatting with a friend like it was the most ordinary evening in the world. I stammered, asking her why they'd come back early and why the house was packed. Barely looking at me, she shrugged it off. We just decided to get together, no reason, so we came home a little sooner. That's when the thought hit me like a bolt of lightning. But how did you get inside? The gate was locked from the inside. And in that instant, I woke up in my dark room, heart pounding. Shaken, I flipped the light switch. Just like in the dream, nothing happened. No light. Fear washed over me. I jumped out of bed, shaking myself, slapping my face, even pinching until it hurt, trying to be sure I was awake. Everything looked so real, every detail sharp and clear. Finally, convinced this was reality, I calmed down and headed toward the kitchen for a drink. But the moment I opened the door, my mother was standing there. I started shouting, "You couldn't have gotten in! The gate was locked! This is still a dream!" I thrashed around, desperate to wake myself, jumping, flailing, clawing at my arms. The world blurred and warped, and at last I woke up again, drenched in cold sweat. This time, the lamp came on. I laughed nervously, trying to reassure myself. The cat squinted at me, annoyed by the sudden light. Still chuckling, I said, "What are you staring at? Just a nightmare." And then she answered, in a human voice. "Are you sure it's over? Did you really think we'd let you go so easily?" A wave of irrational, suffocating terror crushed me. I tried to scream, to roll out of bed, to do anything to wake up. 15 endless seconds of fighting, and I finally broke free. This time, I didn't risk going back to sleep. I turned on every light in the house, called someone just to hear a voice, put music on, and sat back at the computer until dawn. This time, the lamp came on. I laughed nervously, trying to reassure myself. The cat squinted at me, annoyed by the sudden light. Still chuckling, I said, "What are you staring at? Just a nightmare." And then she answered, in a human voice. "Are you sure it's over? Did you really think we'd let you go so easily?" A wave of irrational, suffocating terror crushed me. I tried to scream, to roll out of bed, to do anything to wake up. 15 endless seconds of fighting, and I finally broke free. This time, I didn't risk going back to sleep. I turned on every light in the house, called someone just to hear a voice, put music on, and sat back at the computer until dawn. Trapped in a dream. Not long ago, my parents went out of town to spend a few days at the dacha. Nothing unusual about it, though they rarely left the city. They planned to return Tuesday. On Sunday night, I stayed up at my computer until about 3 a.m. Exhausted, I finally shut it down, slid the bolt across the gate, and headed to bed with the cat curled beside me. I drifted off almost instantly. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by strange noises in the hallway. I figured it was our other cat messing around. I reached for the night lamp, but it wouldn't turn on. Need to change the bulb, I thought, trying the ceiling light. Nothing. Great, power's out. And then, the corridor light snapped on by itself. It was motion activated. When I opened my bedroom door, my jaw nearly hit the floor. The house was full of people. Familiar people. All my parents' friends were there, laughing, talking, and even my parents themselves. My mom was in the kitchen, chatting with a friend like it was the most ordinary evening in the world. I stammered, asking her why they'd come back early and why the house was packed. Barely looking at me, she shrugged it off. We just decided to get together, no reason, so we came home a little sooner. That's when the thought hit me like a bolt of lightning. But how did you get inside? The gate was locked from the inside. And in that instant, I woke up in my dark room, heart pounding. Shaken, I flipped the light switch. Just like in the dream, nothing happened. No light. Fear washed over me. I jumped out of bed, shaking myself, slapping my face, even pinching until it hurt, trying to be sure I was awake. Everything looked so real, every detail sharp and clear. Finally, convinced this was reality, I calmed down and headed toward the kitchen for a drink. But the moment I opened the door, my mother was standing there. I started shouting, "You couldn't have gotten in! The gate was locked! This is still a dream!" I thrashed around, desperate to wake myself, jumping, flailing, clawing at my arms. The world blurred and warped, and at last I woke up again, drenched in cold sweat. This time the lamp came on. I laughed nervously, trying to reassure myself. The cat squinted at me, annoyed by the sudden light. Still chuckling, I said, "What are you staring at? Just a nightmare." And then she answered, in a human voice. "Are you sure it's over? Did you really think we'd let you go so easily?" A wave of irrational, suffocating terror crushed me. I tried to scream, to roll out of bed, to do anything to wake up. 15 endless seconds of fighting, and I finally broke free. This time, I didn't risk going back to sleep. I turned on every light in the house, called someone just to hear a voice, put music on, and sat back at the computer until dawn. This time, the lamp came on. I laughed nervously, trying to reassure myself. The cat squinted at me, annoyed by the sudden light. Still chuckling, I said, "What are you staring at? Just a nightmare." And then she answered, in a human voice. "Are you sure it's over? Did you really think we'd let you go so easily?" A wave of irrational, suffocating terror crushed me. I tried to scream, to roll out of bed, to do anything to wake up. 15 endless seconds of fighting, and I finally broke free. This time, I didn't risk going back to sleep. I turned on every light in the house, called someone just to hear a voice, put music on, and sat back at the computer until dawn.
A new nightclub had just opened in town. It was built on an empty lot, a round, pitch-black building that looked exactly like a giant hockey puck. Fittingly, they named it The Puck. From the start, the club became a hotspot for local youth. Drinks were cheap, women got in free, and every night promised a new themed show. When autumn came, the owners announced a massive Halloween event. Guests were told to come in costumes, scary, creative, anything that fit the occasion. Of course, plenty of people ignored the dress code, brushing it off as childish, though in reality they just lacked imagination. Still, about half the crowd showed up dressed as ghosts, pirates, zombies, Freddy Kruegers, even Hitlers, all kinds of horrors. The night was a success. The party was wild, the show top-notch. Among the crowd, an 18-year-old guy met a striking blonde. She was older, 25 maybe, but he didn't care. They danced together the whole night. When the party ended, he offered to walk her home. They grabbed their coats and stepped outside. The boy asked where she lived. Smiling, she said it was nearby, and led him around the back of the puck. On that side of the club, though, there weren't any houses. The boy frowned in confusion. Then the clouds shifted, revealing a full moon. Its pale light fell across the blonde's face, and his blood ran cold. Her beauty was gone. In its place, a skull with empty eye sockets and a mouth of rotten, crooked teeth. She was no girl at all. She was a corpse. The boy froze, unable to speak. The corpse woman rasped in a cracked, ancient voice. This nightclub was built on an old cemetery. There used to be a village here. I was 24 when I died of hunger, and they buried me beneath this ground. Please, do me a kindness.
Put up a headstone for me, here where I rest. Maybe then I can finally sleep in peace. My name was Praskovia Rezunova, 1885 to 1909. And with that, she sank into the earth. The boy later visited his grandmother, a Rezunova by birth, and, to his shock, confirmed the story. The dead girl was his great-great-grandmother, who had indeed starved to death in 1909. The family raised a monument for her. The club management tried to remove it more than once, worried about sparing off customers. But the word was already out. The puck had been built on graves. Some people started to reflect. Their ancestors had died in hunger and misery, buried here, while they were out drinking and dancing on their bones. Soon, no one went to the puck anymore, and the club closed down. Something terrifying happened to me not long ago. I've always believed the human mind has a strange defense mechanism. It filters supernatural things so they don't completely shatter our sanity. So when we glimpse something in the mirror, or catch the shape of a figure standing by our bed, or hear tapping on the window at night, it's better not to dwell too hard on what it really was. Our consciousness protects us. That night, though, I wasn't so lucky. I had stayed up way too late playing Lineage. When I finally glanced at the clock, it was nearly 4 in the morning. I sighed, decided to call it a night, and went to check the lock on my front door. I live alone, and I'm obsessive about making sure it's bolted. Anyone who knows the Mayday district in Siberia will understand why. I stepped into the hallway. The carpet muffled my steps, the new flooring didn't creak. Everything was silent, except for the sound coming from outside my front door. Breathing. Raspy, wheezing, like someone badly congested. I froze, thinking it must be a drunk who wandered inside the building. Carefully, I peered through the peephole. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But the breathing sounded so close, as if someone was pressed right up against the door, forehead to the peephole. Then came the bang. Boom! My coffee-fueled heart nearly exploded. I stumbled back, sliding down the wall. After a few seconds, I convinced myself I had imagined the breathing. Maybe some drunk had just collapsed against the door. But then, 2 more bangs. Boom! Boom! And then came a new sound. Wet slaps, as if someone was smacking the door with a bare, soaked hand. Adrenaline surged. Furious more than afraid, I leapt up, ready to grab a mop from the kitchen and chase the intruder off. But the slaps stopped, and some strange instinct told me to look through the peephole again. That's when I saw them. On the dusty floor of the landing, a trail of handprints was appearing, one by one, leading away from my door and toward the apartment across the hall. Then, with a sharp thud, a dent appeared in my neighbor's door, padded in old faux leather. Seconds later, the door burst open. My 30-year-old neighbor stumbled out, bleary-eyed, clutching a baseball bat, cursing loudly, only to find silence and emptiness. When he finally stomped back inside, I forced myself to open my door and examine the handprints. At first, they looked ordinary, but only at first. The left hand had 4 fingers, the right 6, and that wasn't the end. The next morning, I ran into my neighbor. We ended up talking about the incident, and he admitted something chilling. After storming back into his apartment, he kept staring through his peephole for a while. He swore he saw me crouched outside, examining the prints, but he also saw something moving behind me, something he couldn't quite describe. He never shouted a warning. So in the end, he saw what I couldn't. I only witnessed the effect of whatever it was, not the thing itself. Nothing similar has happened since that night. Still, whenever I stay up late at my computer, I make sure not to go near the front door.